Okay, Dad, good morning.
Good
Today
morning.
is Wednesday, October 2nd, and you know what we got to talk about. We got to talk about this Iranian missile attack. So, could you just start us off by telling us what happened, and then we'll dive into the weeds?
Okay, yeah. Yesterday, actually, it was yesterday morning. Here Eastern, U.S. Eastern time, I started to get reports that an attack was imminent, and then it happened. It The missiles were launched shortly thereafter. You hear differing estimates of the number of missiles fired, but they tend to the estimates cluster around 200, maybe 250 missiles were fired. And these were, according to the Iranians, they're not their best, but clearly this was, as Scott Ritter describes it, the good stuff. And that first attack, it wasn't really an attack. Okay, we'll call it the demonstration that was done in April by Iran. That largely consisted of drones, slow-moving drones that took hours, something like 5 hours, to reach Israel from Iran. Cruise missiles that are also relatively slow, and then a very few ballistic missiles, high speed ballistic missiles, and those came at the end. They did actually, hit their targets, and clearly that was all for show. Um, uh, this time it was real. These were, I think, it was almost entirely the strike was made up almost entirely of ballistic missiles that reached Israel very quickly in something like 12, 15 minutes at the most. Um, if you remember, in the first attack, it was the U.S. Air Force was um, um, played a very major role in shooting down these drones and cruise missiles, and as did the French and the British. And
And the
in fact, probably,
Jordanians
yeah,
as
even the
well.
Jordanians played a role. That's true. In fact, probably most of the incoming drones and missiles were shot down by British, American, and French missiles fired from their planes. This time, the Americans apparently did fire at least a dozen, maybe 18 air defense missiles. And it's not clear if they shot down anything. Maybe they did, but they clearly weren't able to do much. They didn't have time to react, and so I think it's very revealing. There was a lot of triumphalism after that first demonstration show. Now, I think again, people like us, um, people who dissent from mainstream media, pointed this out, that this was not, this was not reflective of Iran's capabilities. I mean, just these slow moving drones were going to be easy to shoot down. And Iran knew that and knew they were going to be shot down. They sent them, partly as just to telegraph their intentions, because they didn't actually intend to cause major destruction. They also depleted a lot of the, interceptors and air-to-air missiles that were used, and then they also were able to gather intelligence. So, this is something we pointed out, but in the West, and even up to like just the day before this attack, I was seeing reports that, this just proved that the Iranians were extremely weak. I was reading a New York Times piece that came out a day before the missile launch, was saying, well, it looks like probably these Iranians aren't going to do anything because they've been exposed as a paper tiger. They're weak. Back in April, their attempt at attacking Israel was just pathetic. And I took, I guess, some grim satisfaction from that. That we've criticized that point and pointed out the fallacy of that position. And sometimes I wonder, well, maybe we're wrong, but well, we were right. The New York Times was wrong, and that was shown that this attack, again, we're talking about 200 or so ballistic missiles, clearly deeply and clearly overwhelmed Israel's air defenses. Because, you've seen anybody who's spent any time, just like looking at the videos that are out there that are available. There were many dozens and dozens of impacts just appearing in these videos. There's one that I remember seeing in particular that shows I counted 20 impacts. Major explosions is clearly, you don't know exactly what they're hitting, but they've gone through. They were not intercepted, and they're striking Israeli territory. And we have. It's clear that they hit at least 3 Israeli air bases. They hit a gathering of actually armored vehicles in Gaza to help Hamas there and to protect Gaza, defend Gaza. They hit targets in Tel Aviv, and again, you can see videos of buildings being struck directly there in Tel Aviv. There's also reports that they hit like gas rigs off the coast of Israel. So it was extensive. It was major. It in the end, I think initially maybe a certain number of missiles were intercepted. I remember looking at like the first videos that came out, and you could see interceptions towards the end, like that one with the 20. I think you saw 20 come down, and maybe one was intercepted. One.
Yeah.
It was just like they could do nothing. They were defenseless. Now, Israel is claiming that there were no casualties, and I've read like there was a piece that came out in the Guardian, the British newspaper, that said that indicates that this was military failure. Well, first of all, let's say it indicates no such thing. It's not like your point is of attack like this is casualties, military or civilian. You want to strike installations, you want to strike, infrastructure. And so that's simply not a valid point. But I think it also is important to remember that Israel has a history of lying about casualties in previous missile attacks. For example, during the 1991 Gulf War, the Saddam Hussein fired Scud missiles into Israel. And at the time, Israel claimed that there were no casualties. And it was years later, it was revealed that there were 14 people were killed and dozens of people were injured. So it's, again, Israel has a history of lying about these things. So there's no reason to believe that. But even if it's true, it does not mean that this was a failure. Because there's no reason to believe that that's what Iran was intending to do. And then there's also, these ridiculous reports. Of course, I think you were pointing out to me that the major news channels here in the U.S. were celebrating the amazing air defense of Israel, and it's just like, again, you don't have to. You don't have to. In a minute, you can get videos just showing that that's absurd. That their air defense, certainly at some point just was overwhelmed, but then there was other ones. I think there was a CNN story, and then again this Guardian story that I mentioned earlier. They referred to, they admitted that fragments fell on Israel and made impact, and it's just silly. Look at the video. Fragments don't go. Don't strike the ground, at that speed and cause massive explosions. If they're fragments, then they're rather awesome fragments. And
right, it's little meteors. At that point.
It's really silly, but it's clear that these. It's a reminder too that why we have to do what we're doing, and other dissident. Why we have dissident media. It's just that the mainstream media has ceased to be, about honest reporting. Again, you can just in some cases they can be reporting. You can see in the background, what's going on there, that they're lying. They're not describing the reality. But they have been given guidelines, how you're supposed to report things, and they follow the guidelines regardless of what. And
Yeah, but the
So,
power of mainstream media is still there. Even if
mhm.
people see with their own eyes the videos of these things hitting, a lot of people will still believe.
Yeah,
For example, I have a good friend that's in the National Guard. I was texting him during this time, and he thinks that the Iron Dome and these stat systems took down over 90% of these missiles. And I was just like, dude, just watch the videos. Can you corroborate that in any way? Is there any evidence of any footage showing where the majority of the missiles were intercepted? And I can't see any. I haven't been able to find anything. So
hmm
we may never know the truth, exactly what percentage were hit their targets. But it's just clear if you just look online that the Iron Dome failed, and this is
right,
proof that Israel is defenseless when it comes to these types of barrages. And who knows, what percentage of their interceptors they've expended and how many more they have for another barrage, because this one, it didn't seem like they had a lot to fire at it. I mean, there are 180 ballistic missiles, and like you said, in the later salvos that hit Israel, I didn't some of those videos. I didn't see any even
right,
attempt at an
right,
interception.
right.
So it seemed
Sometimes
like
maybe
they
you might
just.
see one interception out of 20 or just none. So it's clear, maybe they intercepted a fairly high percentage of the first ones came in. Maybe,
But even
I
then, I
actually,
haven't seen the
I think
footage.
that's doubtful because, again, it's just like even the Ukrainians, who are always exaggerating their interception, success, and have, to much to the amusement of many of us, have sometimes claimed to have shot down more missiles than were fired or whatever. They have, recently come out and said like they only get like 5% of the ballistic missiles, as they're, these, and some of these were hypersonic apparently. I remember at least seeing one where this, a particularly fast moving missiles, it struck, it hit its target, but it was, but the other ones they're difficult to hit. I mean, even with the very advanced systems. So I think it's very doubtful that they got even a high percentage of the initial ones. I'm sure they got some of them, but at the end, and we saw those, they had nothing. And it just shows that, and this was a limited attack by Iran. I think a few years ago, like the U.S. estimated that they had 8,000 missiles in their arsenal, but they certainly have more now. Now we talk about 200. That's a very small percentage of what they have. I mean, if with this they could just overwhelm Israel's air defense system, it bodes very poorly for Israel's future in a war with Iran. One
Which
thing I
is
just wanted to
happening
point,
now.
yeah, well, yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to point out very quickly is a lot of people say it was the Iron Dome that failed. Actually, the Iron Dome wasn't even involved in this. The Iron Dome is a system that is actually designed to intercept these small primitive rockets, mostly those fired from Gaza and some from
And
Lebanon.
the
So,
Katyusha rockets.
yeah, right. So we're talking about it's actually the David sling and the arrow system, and there were some U.S. systems too. There, I think they had the Patriot and the THAAD, and that's what we're talking about. And these are very expensive missiles. I mean, I think the $3 million for a single for an arrow missile is
Four
one to
million for a
for David.
Patriot.
Yeah, right. 4 million for a Patriot. And then on the other hand, it's less than 100,000 for one of these Iranian ballistic missiles. It costs something, but it's a very small fraction of
Right. I mean, we may not know. They're not going to tell us, but we know that these advanced interceptor missiles. There's a serious issue with production capabilities that we aren't able to
yeah.
produce much.
Oh yeah,
Ukraine
no,
doesn't
there's
have
a
any,
right,
and,
right.
and I think the Arrow too, and the those missiles, I believe they're not built in Israel. They're built in the U.S. and we're not able to crank
Yeah,
them out.
right. Yeah, yeah. For
So
example, for Patriot interceptors, I mean, it came out that we were able to, I believe, produce 550 in a year. And
right.
we're trying to crank it up to 650, and we're not we're not succeeding. The U.S. was not succeeding at that. So yeah, that just gives you an idea. In general, it looks to me like, I mean, both the U.S. and Israel is kind of an extension of the U.S. when it comes to weapons capabilities. Both the U.S. and Israel are really geared for, first of all, fighting technologically inferior opponents and overwhelming them in very brief exchanges. And they're not, they haven't prepared for a war of attrition against a peer adversary, as Russia has in Ukraine. And that's what they would have if they came, up against, if they wage war with Iran, which looks like they have every indication of doing.
Yeah, well, I saw. Can you confirm that Israel has officially declared war on Iran? I saw that, but it could have just been Twitter speak. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. Or I missed that if that happened. But they have promised, and Netanyahu has stated that they will retaliate. Initially, they said they were going to retaliate, that very night, and then, the whole Middle East would see it. And then they pulled back from that and said, okay, we'll retaliate at some time of our choosing, and but that we will. Now, interestingly, both France and the UK have said that they will have no part of a retaliation, if that's the way that Israel, and advised Israel not to. So they're getting cold feet on this, maybe becoming a little bit more realistic.
So who's in Israel's corner? Is it just the U.S. now? U.S., Canada?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. It's just still. Yeah, still these Western countries like France and UK, they support Israel. They'll probably keep on sending them months, but they don't want to be directly involved in an attack
right.
on Iran. But the U.S., I think the U.S. probably would not want to be, but they keep on saying that they're standing by Israel. They'll defend them. They'll continue to supply the weapons that Israel uses, that they would use in an attack in Iran. And, well, they offered, they obviously also provide air defense, but it didn't seem like it amounted to anything. But they're there, I think, in case things start to go really wrong for Israel. Then we'll see. That's when, when they that'll be the moment of truth. It's just like, will the U.S. actually attack Iran? And I think, at some point, the pressure for it to do that may become overwhelming. Now, not Israel, but Iran has already made it clear that if any other power, and I think they're really pointing to the U.S., becomes involved, attacks Iran, that their bases, will immediately become objects of Iranian attack. Again, the U.S. has many bases throughout the Middle East, and those in Iraq are particularly, and Syria are particularly vulnerable.
Yeah, it's a scary situation. I mean, I just feel like if the U.S. does get involved, then there's going to be a lot of body bags, flag draped coffins coming back to the U.S. because these bases in the Middle East, they are sitting ducks. There's nothing that we can really do. So it's like, why are we there? Are we there just for moral support? I mean, if you do carry out a strike on Iran, then they're gone. There's not going to be an airstrip for those planes to come back to. But
Right.
I
Right.
just
Yeah,
don't understand.
that's actually something that somebody pointed out. Right. If Israel, if it attacks Iran, almost certainly will do it using its aircraft. It'll be manned aircraft. But this will it takes a while for them to get around to Iran and to return. It's going to be an hour or something, and they have to be refueled in flight. And during that, again, Iran can send high precision missiles that take less than 15 minutes. So if that's in fact what Israel does, if it launches an air attack on Iran, Iran can strike all the bases, every last air base in Israel, hit the runways, crater them. Now, I think they may have done that already, but runways can be repaired fairly rapidly, in a matter of certainly of days, maybe in a day, but I don't think they can be repaired in minutes or in hours. And you'll have these planes that won't have a place to land.
Yeah. Well, so an Israeli retaliation will come, but I kind of wonder what form will it be? Because like I was also thinking that will they use their Air Force? I see kind of three options. If they use the Air Force, that seems to be a very poor decision because it takes time. Iran has air defense systems supplied by Russia, the
Right.
S-400, as well
Right.
as
Aircraft are particularly vulnerable to air defense systems.
right. So you wonder how close they would even be able to get. And during that flight time, Iran would have plenty of time to respond. Another option is if they're able to use some type of assets that they may have already within Iran, like the MEK or something like this, to pull off some type of terrorist attack, detonate some type of large explosive, covertly within Iran. But then the third option is, I guess, would be their inner ICBMs, their intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have the Jericho 2, the Jericho
Right.
3,
Right.
which have can definitely reach Iran, and these ballistic missiles are very difficult to intercept. Who knows? The S-400 coupled with these electronic warfare systems, maybe they could take down the Jericho. But I think Iran doesn't. It's a gamble. With these things,
Right.
who knows if they can take it
Right.
down or not.
Yeah. No, yeah, my understanding again, Scott Ritter, is very good on this because he was, a weapons inspector, but he specialized actually in missiles. Like he was involved directly. I think he was in charge of the campaign to eradicate the Scud launchers during the first Gulf War, and so this is something he really knows what he's talking about. And he said that, yeah, they do have the Jericho 2 and Jericho 3 that can easily reach Iran, but they're really not designed for, again, anything like a war of attrition. They're very expensive, very limited in quantity. So yeah, you could hit a high value target, but you can't overwhelm air defense systems like the Iranians did, because you just can't send them in the numbers that the Iranians sent their missiles. So yeah, they might be able to hit a target or two. There's a question again. The S-400, again, like you say, coupled with the EW systems provided by Russia, but certainly these are capable of taking down the Jerichos. Now, they may not do it. There's always a chance that something will get through, and if we've seen from the Ukraine war, it's when Russia's confronted with a new weapon, it usually takes them a little bit of time to tweak their system, to neutralize that weapon. So, maybe the first volley of Jerichos, some would get through and could do some significant damage, but that would probably be about it. And again, it just can't, it won't be able to carry out the widespread kind of devastating attack with the Jerichos. So they just don't have the numbers to do that.
Right. I was chatting with GPT, the O1, yesterday, asking about the probability of a Jericho 3 hitting a target in Tehran if the S-400 plus these electronic warfare systems were there. I mean, it gave me a percentage of 30 to 60% chance of intercepting it. Of course, this is GPT. It doesn't mean anything, but I was just curious, just kind of seeing what it would say. And I'm like,
Right.
I don't know. But the thing is, nobody knows because it's never been done before. So
Right.
and we can speculate all we want, but I think the real fear is that the ICBM would be used to carry a nuclear payload. If
Right.
ever,
Well, that's really, it's designed for it. Right. It's nuclear capable.
we talked about this
Right.
earlier that in a war of attrition or in a war with Iran, that likely Israel would escalate immediately because they know that in the long run they can't win this war of attrition, that they would maybe go nuclear sooner rather than later. We've talked about just their willingness to use nuclear weapons if they feel like the existence of Israel is at stake, and that just the fact that their deterrent capabilities are no longer exist, that in itself is existential. So that
Different. Right.
right. So if that's the case, do you think that what is the chance that they wouldn't start with a nuke? Like that would just be the end of Israel, right? I mean, there's no way. But the thing is, I'm like, no way. But then so many things that I've seen Israel do, I've been like, no way. That's it. So I don't know if it's a rational actor.
Exactly. And they've just shown a real savagery, like just a complete lack of restraint and disregard for, I don't think that they've reached that point, where they would use a nuclear weapon like at this, at this stage. But I think the threshold for Israel is much lower than it is for another country, certainly like Russia. When Russia says that its existence is threatened, well, I think they're quite serious about that. I mean, there would be tremendous reluctance to do it. And then, and I think, thank God, Russia is large enough and strong enough where that is highly unlikely. It's possible, especially if NATO goes all out in an air campaign against Russia, that could happen. It could trigger a response. But in the case of Israel, I think they've shown that they're in general that you don't need to give them much of an excuse for launching any kind of war, right? They've and I'm afraid that we'll have to be honest about that. It's going to also apply to their use of nuclear weapons. It's not, their notion of let's say an existential threat is defined much more broadly, I suspect, than it is by other countries. And yeah, just like the loss of fear among their adversaries. I think that would be sufficient for them. It could be anyway. And we are starting to get, we're not there yet, but we're
pretty damn close.
Yeah, we're getting close. So it is scary.
Well, Iran, basically this ballistic barrage, we said in the last podcast that at this point Iran has to retaliate. The amount of pressure internally in Iran and just really throughout the region, almost globally, for Iran to do something, especially after failure to respond to the Ismail Haniyeh assassination, was reaching at this point. And then after the assassination of Nasrallah, it seems like this attack by Iran was like almost like a disciplinary action towards Israel. That this wasn't they're not leveling Tel Aviv. It was, even though it was a large ballistic attack, it was measured and calculated. It was done at night. It targeted these air bases, which were probably mostly empty at the time. I don't know. We may never know the extent of the damage. But they said that if Israel responds, attacks Iran, then they will unleash the real attack. They will unleash devastation. And so what I'm afraid could very easily happen. I mean, I'm not making, huge logic leaps here, is that, okay, Israel promised retaliation, they will. Iran warned them, if you do this, then we will send a bunch of missiles. And then at that point, that's when Israel launches their Jericho 3 ICBM with a nuclear warhead headed towards Iran. That's what I'm afraid of, is that they'll do this, they'll just try to pull off some big attack. Let's hope it's not successful. But if it is, then Iran unleashes thousands of missiles. And this time, it's a clear message that, okay, we're ending you, Israel, or coming, really doing some real damage. This isn't just we're not playing around anymore. And then that's when Israel launches Jerichos with nuclear warheads. I just think that's just the way I see it playing out right now. I mean, of course, we don't know. Who knows what's going to happen, but it just seems to me the most logical conclusion to this conflict right now. And this could happen in a matter of weeks. Do you think that's what do you think? Am I being insane?
No. The problem is that we have, you can almost say, an insane country. Is Israel. It's in the grips of some kind of insanity. It's on a rampage, and I mean, like in retrospect, I shouldn't have been shocked, but of course, after this, the rampage in Gaza, the genocidal onslaught there, I shouldn't have expected anything different in Lebanon. But I thought, well, now it's, I guess I was thinking back to past invasions. Yes, they were cruel, they were, unwarranted, but they were actually showed some sort of restraint. There was not much of an effort to minimize. There wasn't an effort to minimize civilian casualties, but it seemed like they took that into account. They didn't want to, didn't want civilian casualties to be excessive. There certainly were many civilian casualties, but now they just obviously don't care. It almost seems to be intentional. It's not just that they're, or, it says, okay, there's one Hezbollah commander in one house. We'll just take out the neighborhood. Okay, there's a meeting of Hezbollah leaders. We'll take out the 6 apartment buildings and kill who knows how many hundreds and hundreds of civilians. And they do it without any, it seems like without any hesitation. Yeah, there just it seems to be a total disregard for you could say Gentile life, in this case. And yeah, so, I'd like to say that, oh, that just can't happen, but I can't, it's just on the basis of what we've seen. If I don't think they're going to go to it right away, but they may find themselves in a bad position fairly quickly. And then the pressures will build within Israel to use, at least some sort of tactical nuclear weapon. They might not go through outright, like obliteration of Tehran, but maybe first a tactical nuclear weapon, used against a certain facility or something like that. But I could see it happening. I think we're closer to it than we have been
Ever.
for a long time, maybe ever. When we talk about the possibility of, the use of nuclear weapons, the focus is always on Russia and Ukraine. And yeah, it's important to consider that possibility, of course, because, that's where if it goes nuclear, it could become world ending. And so even if the odds are very low, it's a very, very serious matter. But I think that the chance that nuclear weapons is going to be, if nuclear weapons are used sometime in the near future, it's much more likely that they'll be used in the Middle East and they'll be used by Israel. And, one thing I want to show you, it's, it's clear, I think, that Israel has miscalculated. They've underestimated the strength of Iran and its resolve, and that they've done the same thing with Hezbollah. I think this is, well, it may be actually in part a consequence of their initial successes against Hezbollah. These decapitation strikes, you have to say, were very successful. Shockingly successful. And I think that's made them overconfident. It's something that you see in war again and again. We can think of all kinds of wars that have begun, of course, the most famous is World War II, where in the early stages, the Germans had, amazing success, in both the West and then the East. And well, especially because they're success in the West, they went too far, and with the consequences that we all understand. But it can create this overconfidence, and then you lose your proper sense of caution and realism. And maybe that's what's happening in Israel. That Netanyahu feels really emboldened, and so we see, okay, we've got this. Of course, there's the missile attack that we were just talking about, is so very important. But let's not forget about the ground invasion, which has begun. And interestingly, all the initial reports are that Israeli forces have been badly mauled and that there have been several deaths among IDF soldiers. So that's actually gone off to a very bad start. One thing we're always pointing out, for a long time is that, again, that's where Hezbollah's strength is, and that the last time that Israel attempted an invasion in 2006, they were taught a really harsh lesson by Hezbollah. And so that's why a lot of people were doubting that they would even try it, but they did it. And I think it may be just a symptom of this overconfidence. This initial success has made them think, now Hezbollah, we have them on the ropes, we can do it. And now we see this is, It's an old story that's played out in many wars. A power that's initially very successful becomes overconfident with terrible consequences.
Do you think there's any chance for de-escalation at this point?
Well, there's always a chance. I just don't see it because the problem is that Israel clearly is not interested in diplomacy at this point. I mean, every action that they have taken has been taken in order to undermine diplomacy. Now, Iran, as I think a lot of people say very naively, this new President Pezeshkian, tried, very hard to undertake some kind of diplomacy and to avoid war and achieve a ceasefire in Gaza, and but it became clear, everything that Israel did was calculated to undermine and to actually shut the door on diplomacy. There's of course the assassination of Hania. It's important to realize again this was on the immediately following the inauguration of the new president, who was a reformist president who had declared his intention to seek, peace with the West. If Israel was at all interested, in some kind of diplomatic solution, they would not be trying to undermine him, to directly, provoke attack, again, really directed at his authority. But they did. And then, of course, the chief negotiator, and we have to remember that. Sometimes it's forgotten now. The man that they assassinated, Hania, he was the chief negotiator for Hamas, right? And so if you're interested in negotiations, you don't kill the chief negotiator on the other side and somebody who's known to be a moderate. He's been replaced by somebody who's more of a hardliner. Everything that they've done has been calculated to avoid any kind of solution. It's all an attempt to escalate and to bring about war. So there's just no sign of any intention on the Israeli side at this point to climb down.
It's just so crazy though, because surely like after what just happened, okay, the first retaliation from Iran, slow drones, you could see the spin story. They said, okay, yeah, our air defense is great. But this last barrage that just happened yesterday has proven that Israel's defenseless. So why are you doing this? Why, at this point, should they realize like, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, because clearly if they wanted to level Tel Aviv, they could do it. So maybe we should calm down, and we were a little too overconfident, and we really made some big mistakes in trying to avoid diplomacy. But at this stage, clearly they should realize that this is not going to end well for us.
Right.
Surely they people in Israel, Israelis, they don't want to die, right? They have to be coming to this realization, or many of them do, right? Or are they not?
I don't see any signs of it. You have individual Israelis that express these opinions, these viewpoints, but it's just there is no faction, there's nobody within the government that is showing any desire to actually negotiate their way out of this and to seek peace with their neighbors. In general, for example, the Israeli attacks on Hezbollah, the decapitation attacks, and in particular the assassination of Nasrallah, these were very popular in Israel within the public. There was a lot of open celebration, and it's actually it consolidated Netanyahu's grip on power.
Right, but now that it's done to them, they should realize, right, that maybe this wasn't a good
unfortunately,
idea.
I just, again, people don't turn around this quickly. It's going to take a lot more than this. This is probably, now they've gone down this path of, they've chosen the path of violence. And, you're not going to see a 180-degree turn. They're going to continue. We're going to see more of the same. It may be, the dangerous thing is, okay, yeah, if it really starts to come home and then that they're, the parts of the city of Tel Aviv are destroyed, and you would think maybe there would be a reckoning, a reassessment. But to be honest, that's generally not what happens in wars. You look what's happening in Ukraine. You would hope that would be some sort of rising outcry for peace in Ukraine, for negotiation. You hear some murmurings on the edges, but the government shows no sign of listening to them, and they continue to pursue the hard line. And
right,
they do nothing but escalate and double down. Right,
they're going to be blinded by just revenge and bloodlust. We're coming up close to the 1 year anniversary of October 7th, and I think a big problem now that Israel has is that it's been 1 year of them bombing Gaza, and footage coming out of children that have been shredded and just blown apart, and also them bombing places in Syria, bombing port in Yemen, these bombings in Lebanon constantly. And then we knew that when there would be some type of retaliation and Israel is finally struck with these missiles, that there would be this cry of, Israel is under attack, poor little Israel, everybody needs to help and save Israel. And they're doing that. Clearly, you can see the Israeli spin machine. But because of the past year, they're getting very little sympathy, and rightly so. People are like, well, yeah, you've been doing this to all of your neighbors for a year. We've been seeing you bomb, just bombing central Beirut, decimating Gaza, and then people partying in the streets as it's happening, to celebrate. And now you're getting a little bit of dose of your own medicine. And then there's all this pray for Israel, protect Israel, everybody, Israel's not alone, everybody. And it's...
and it's also important to say, well, in a way, they're not even getting a dose of their own medicine. I mean, the attacks that both Hezbollah and Iran have directed against Israel have focused on military targets.
Right.
They entirely
very careful. Very careful.
Very in great contrast to what Israel has done.
Right. They're clearly trying to abide by some semblance of the rules of war, where Israel seems to be going out of its way to commit war crimes. It doesn't seem to distinguish between doesn't seem to distinguish between civilian and military targets at all. So it's amazing that we knew that they would do this, that they would say like, oh, Israel, we need to help Israel, but I just don't see them getting the sympathy that they hope, even within the United States. I saw there's a Gallup poll where now it's showing that the majority of Americans oppose Israel's actions now. So it just seems like they've lost everybody from what they're doing, and they're trying to get that sympathy again. And how's it's going to, I just don't see how it's going to play out and how it's going to affect us here, how America's support is going to continue. Because something else I've been seeing a lot, for example, like, we live here in East Tennessee, and we personally have been affected by the flooding, but many cities not far from us, like Newport, Tennessee, just nearby, has been devastated by the flooding that here. And in Asheville, North Carolina, just over the mountains, is completely destroyed. And people, I see people, watching local news. So many people in Knoxville and the communities are getting together and gathering up supplies, water to send to these distressed communities. And then you see Biden, when people are asking him about the help we can give, he said, oh, we've given all we can. But then Israel comes by and we give $20 billion to Israel, and then we give $150 billion to Ukraine. Give all this. Seems like there's no amount of money that we'd be willing to give to these countries. But when America itself, communities are devastated, it seems like all of a sudden their pocketbooks are empty. They don't have any money to hand out, and it's up for the community to come together, which I love to see. I think that's how it should be. The communities need to get together and support the other community. But a lot of people are pointing this out now, and I think it's just showing just just how twisted the United States priorities are. Mm-hmm. My wife had a friend that lost a house in the Maui fires. Mm-hmm. U.S. government, I think, gave $950 per family. That's it. And then we're just writing checks. I just don't understand how that's possible. How can they treat Americans this way, that they just don't give a damn about what's happening in our own country when there's problems? But we're sending thousands of troops now to the Middle East. We just gave Israel, $8.7 billion last week. But when it comes to helping American families that are suffering right here in our community, in our neighborhoods. They don't have, we can't do it. Don't have the means. How is that possible? I mean, the money's the money, right? Why can't they? They don't have any problems writing the checks for these foreign wars that are endangering Americans, but why do they have trouble writing checks when it comes to helping Americans?
Yeah, well, that's a question a lot of people are asking, and it's yeah, reflective of just a general trend throughout the West. Um, in general, you have an establishment that's committed to these globalist projects, or to committed to Israel and committed to Ukraine in particular, and those are their priorities, but in general, they're not the priorities of the people they're supposed to represent. And you're seeing the consequences of that particularly in Europe, or recent elections. The most recent one was in Austria, where the Ukraine skeptic, or even more than that, it's the Freedom Party in Austria that really wants to end support for Ukraine and reestablish economic relations with Russia. They defeated the I guess it's the SDP, the Social Democratic Party, that had been long the establishment party there. So it was a stunning victory, and it shows that the depth of feeling. And again, it's not just Austria; it's Germany, it's France, of course we have Hungary and Slovakia, but even I think recent elections in the Czech Republic show the same trend. The people in general have no interest in supporting these wars, and they do want to have their own concerns addressed. Their concerns, about their own economies and immigration and so on. This is quite natural. But we have an elite that has just become really distant from their own populations, the concerns of their own peoples. In the U.S., we're seeing some of the same things. Again, Israel is to a great extent an exception, because you do have a certain percentage. I know that there is an increasingly skeptical portion, especially the younger generation in this country, skeptical about support for Israel. But you still have a large segment of the population that is very highly supportive of Israel and of Zionism. The establishment, of course, is entirely committed to Zionism, in both parties, and they're also very strongly committed to Ukraine. But we do see a softening of support for Ukraine on the Republican side, and I think it's reflective of what you were just saying. There is people are hearing that, looking at that, wondering why we're sending $100 billion to Ukraine, and our own obvious needs here are not addressed, and that has been, I think, a powerful and effective message that people like J.D. Vance have been able to make on the Republican side. So I don't think it hasn't gone as far. I mean partly because again in Europe, actually the consequences of the support for Ukraine has actually been much more severe for Europeans. It's affected their economies really. The effect on their economies has been huge, has been highly detrimental, and they're seeing it. And so it's not at all surprising that, again, in this response, we don't have the same effect on our economy, but we do understand that money's going there. And so, again, that is, it's part of a growing awareness in part of the population of how their establishment is not representing their own interests. Now, we'll see. I mean, the establishment so far has shown very, very little willingness to respond to the concerns of their people. At some point, you hope that that democracy actually has some kind of effect on their policies. We haven't seen it yet. I guess the one place maybe where you have seen it is in Germany. I think that Adolf Scholz has
His name is
No, no,
Adolf?
no, no. I'm sorry.
That's not right.
No, that's not right. That's not right. It's, yeah, it's Schultz, but it's not Adolf. Okay, maybe that was a Freudian slip or something. No, he's actually nothing.
I was like,
the
I don't think
mustachio
anybody in
Austria.
Germany's been named
No,
Adolf.
nobody's named. You're right. Exactly. Forgive me. Yeah, Schultz. Actually, I don't know why I did that, but anyway, yeah, Schultz has been backing away from some of his positions, in reference to Ukraine and immigration and so on, because his coalition is in a state of total collapse, and there are parties on both the left and the right that are rising up and taking advantage of this discontent. So you see it playing out in Germany, and maybe who knows? It's just, but what you've seen, and I think in all these countries, is that there's the establishment. It doesn't really seem to care, and when they realize that they have unpopular positions, they play games, to like Macron has in France, to try to hang on to power and to continue to implement their policies, regardless of what the people think.
Yeah, I just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know exactly how the bureaucracy works, I guess, because we are accruing, I think, over $35 billion worth of debt a day. We just turned the printing press, but we're handing out tens of billions, hundreds of billions to these foreign conflicts that are not helping Americans whatsoever. And then I don't understand from a political standpoint, why can't they come up with $1 billion to help rebuild Maui or help to rebuild, Asheville, North Carolina? Like, well, surely they don't have a problem sending billions of dollars to these other countries. Why do they?
Yeah.
Why can't they write the check here? It's
Right.
like they clearly have no problems writing checks. We can get into debate like, okay, well, maybe the U.S. government shouldn't be writing checks to anybody. Okay, we can talk about, but clearly, if you're writing checks to Ukraine and Israel just willy-nilly, why can't you just give 0.1% of that to help rebuild your own cities?
Yeah. Right. Well, in the end, it actually even seems politically just stupid. I mean, there's
that's what I'm saying. Like, why didn't say we've given everything we have?
Right. It's just, maybe you don't give a damn about people in Maui or in North Carolina or East Tennessee. You don't give a damn about them, but you realize it doesn't look good, so you write your $1 billion check or whatever. Right.
Right. That's what I
but
understand.
It just shows the extent to which they really are just out of touch. They just don't. They're concerned with these conflicts and being part of the globalist elite and pushing the globalist agenda and supporting Zionism, and it's so that's where their hearts are, and then it makes them stupid. It makes them blind to sometimes they're even their own interests.
Yeah, it's wild. I hope more and more Americans wake up and realize what we're doing by funding Israel and Ukraine. I heard, I think it was on Judging Freedom, that something like 500,000 Ukrainian people have died now in this war. It's just an extraordinary number. And that's what we're funding. And they're losing more and more territory every day, more and more people dying. And we've talked about this numerous times, how just the U.S. has been weakened greatly by this. Our inability to supply Ukraine with weaponry, our own stockpiles are exhausted. Maybe we can talk about this real quick, just to segue towards the end, is just how do you think this war now in the Middle East that's already kicked off is going to affect the Ukraine war? Because I think Israel gets top priority when it comes to funding, foreign conflicts.
Right. Well, I think it can only hurt Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine's needs are somewhat different from Israel's needs. But they both have a need for air defense. And that Israel is going to get priority. So the interceptors, whatever the U.S. has, and it might not be very much at this point, but whatever they have that they feel that they can hand over will go to Israel. And that's going to hurt Ukraine. I think there's no question about it. Now, there's also artillery shells. It's hard to pretend that Israel has a need for artillery shells, but but I'm sure that they're going to demand them anyway, for their invasion of Lebanon and maybe their continued pulverization of Gaza. And so that's something again that Ukraine needs, and we may see some of that, at least some of that, diverted to Israel. Ukraine can only lose in this. The larger this war becomes, the more that Ukraine will be deprived of the military support that it needs.
Okay, just one last question. Let's just talk about what the U.S. is now doing in response to this clear escalation in the Middle East, this Iranian missile attack. I heard that the U.S. is sending thousands of additional troops to the Middle East. Can you speak on that? What is their objective, and what impact will this have on the conflict? I saw the headlines are to stabilize the Middle East. Is there any way that this will help stabilize anything? What are your thoughts on our involvement? Or should America be going there to defend Israel? We'll just start with that. Should America be going there?
Of course we shouldn't, and we should. Again, this is something that we could end tomorrow if we just finally said no to Israel, but we can't. We can, but our leaders will not. They're beholden to that. I think sometimes they're just really, as we've talked about earlier, they're pissed off. Nobody likes being bossed around by another power. Especially a lesser power. I don't know if this has ever really happened in the history of the world. I can't imagine that it really sits well with people in the administration. With Lloyd Austin, for example. Yeah, that's I was going to give him as an example. They probably really are ticked off, but they always come out. You hear reports of them shouting at the Israelis, and over the phone. And I think a lot of those reports are true, but it doesn't seem to matter. They just know that we have to obey them no matter what, and it's an absurd state of affairs, but it's real. It's just that, especially in this election time, it's like you don't dare cross Israel. Zionism is just all powerful in the U.S. at this time. It really is.
It just doesn't make sense to me, because what's worse than saying no to Israel is when thousands of body bags start coming back from these bases in the Middle East because of what you've done, because you couldn't say no to Israel.
Yeah.
The American troops are really in danger now. I don't think Iran would ever strike the American bases first, but it seems clear that if Netanyahu's in control of our government and our military, he apparently has the ability to say, America, attack Iran, and we might actually do it. And that's just insane. And then
right.
all these bases will be
right.
wiped out.
Yeah.
Thousands of American, men and women will be killed in the Middle East because of this madman, and that's not politically savvy. If you're Biden, like your base, the Democratic base, is much more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. You should be playing to that. And if he played to that in the beginning, he'd be in a much better position. And look where we are now. How is this helping him? This isn't.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it's just that money really talks in U.S. politics, and the donor class is entirely Zionist. I mean, it's just the truth in both parties, and they. I don't think it's just a matter of money. Again, Biden has shown himself to be a real zealous supporter of Zionism all throughout his career, and he's declared himself a Zionist, and I think he really is. So it's also ideological, but the money is always there. They're in the middle of a very close election campaign, and you cross Israel, the money stops flowing, and then you lose the election. I mean, I think that's the way they look at it. So they just don't dare do that. I mean, it's just as simple
the next
as
election's
that.
Next election's going to be interesting, because I don't think Israel will be around for the next presidential election after this one.
Yeah, I don't know.
At the way things are going.
I really don't know. I when I look into my crystal ball, it's just very cloudy. You just see chaos.
Yeah, it's cloudy because it's just dust and destruction from nothing's going to be left of Israel at the rate they're going, and that's why I don't understand. Like, I don't want to see millions of dead Israelis. I don't want that to happen. I don't want to see. I don't want anybody to die. So it's like I'm. If I could tell the Israelis just like for your own self-preservation, please just stop this because it's not going to end well for you. I just don't see how so few people can't see that. It's just it's clear you can't go around massacring your neighbors and expect everything to be okay. You have to stop. You have to make peace. You can't just beat the whole region into submission nonstop. But like I said, that they've gone this far. But I just don't see how they can rationalize it any further. That this will somehow be a victory for Israel. That somehow that this is the right path for Israel. I just don't. I don't see it. I don't see how
you
they
don't
can
see it,
it.
but they see it. I mean, that's the thing. It's just that they're fully committed to this vision, and they've fully committed to this, this military, this violent course that they're on. It's just there are no signs that there is any significant force within Israeli society, and even less so within Israeli politics, to counter this. They're all committed to it. And when people, they have war fever, they stop thinking rationally. It's just the truth. You would think we standing on the outside, we can analyze it. They're not on the outside. They're party to these massacres. That's the thing. It's just that it's not just their soldiers that have committed. In a way, it's just all of the vast majority of Israeli society is complicit. They all have blood on their hands. They've all celebrated it. They've all supported it. People aren't entirely rational creatures. They get into a fight. They get blood on their hands. They stop thinking rationally.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you one last question. Just what do you think is going to happen to the other countries in the region and other great powers like Russia and China? Is there a chance of this exploding into World War III? Like, how will these other global powers respond to what's happening in the Middle East?
Yeah, I don't see this expanding into World War III, though. Again, there's, when you unleash the dogs of war, you just never know what's going to happen. There are always surprises, and it's certainly because of the pre-existing tensions and the current conflict in Ukraine, there is a chance that this could spread and it could become part of just a larger conflict. The U.S. is on one side in both conflicts, and then in Russia and China are right on the other side. So there's a chance that it could kind of fuse together and become a general conflict. It's not impossible, but I don't see that happening anywhere, let's say in the short or medium term. We're talking about a regional war. No, it could be a very major regional war that clearly is going to have global consequences. It can have global economic consequences because, this is the world's leading oil-producing region, and the Straits of Hormuz could very easily be closed if there really is an all-out attack on Iran. I don't see World War III coming out of this directly, but the consequences are real. I mean, it's just, there is always the very real danger, as you brought up earlier, of nuclear weapons being used here. And I think that's more likely that they're going to be used here before they're used in Ukraine. And then there are going to be could be very serious global economic consequences. And then, as we said earlier, it's just that Israel is so so enmeshed within the U.S. political system and U.S. society that it's what its fate is going to be tied to our fate. Let's just put it that way. So.
Okay. Well, again, we'll end it there. We'll see what happens if this Israeli retaliation happens by Friday. but there's so much to talk about. There's a lot happening in Ukraine as well. We haven't touched that in a while. It's being overshadowed by what's happening here in the Middle East. But yeah, we'll continue to report on it. Thanks for your analysis, and yeah, we'll check in on Friday.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good rest of your day.